How is everybody? All right. All right, so this session is about Quarkus, and it's kind of an introduction to Quarkus. Who already knows a little bit about Quarkus here? All right, so it's the right audience. All right, so a quick introduction about myself. I'm Kevin Dubois. I'm a developer advocate at Red Hat. I've been working in the software industry for about 18 years. I'm really passionate about the developer experience, trying to make writing code fun and doing it with open source. And that works out because at Red Hat, that's all we do is open source. So that's pretty cool. You can follow me on Twitter or Mastodon. I'll post the slides afterwards there too. But yeah, so I'll share that afterwards as well. When we're talking about Quarkus, we kind of have to talk about traditional Java first, just so I can kind of tell you a little bit about why the Quarkus project was started and what's the point of it. So traditional Java was kind of designed for a different time, right? So if you think about classic Java, you would typically deploy it on pretty beefy application servers, and throughput would be at the expense of the footprint, so your applications would be pretty big, pretty beefy. And the whole point was to keep them running as long, very long, very stable, and then, with dynamic behaviors, you kind of, add new features or optimize it. But that's not really ideal for cloud native. Cloud native, the whole idea is that your throughput is solved by scaling, right, to create more instances of your application using containers. And those containers, they have limits. They run on nodes, which are typically limited, especially if you're going to run onto the public cloud or something. You can't really have those big servers that you had on-prem and using them in the same way, right? With your traditional Java, if at some point you want to add more resources, basically you do this vertical scaling, which basically means you add more memory, more resources, more CPU, whatever. And that's something that's that's a lot more expensive when you go in the cloud. So traditional Java, the way that it's packaged is you package it, you do your Maven package, Maven install, whatever, or Gradle, or whatever you're using. And then as your application starts up on the server, or as a separate runtime, at that point, it's going to load your configuration files from the file system. It's going to do class path scanning for annotations and all that. And it's going to build its model of the world. And it does all of that while it's starting up. And then at that point, after all that's done, then your application is actually running. So that's not really ideal in the cloud world where you want containers that start up fast, right? You want, if your Kubernetes says, hey, I want to reschedule this pod onto a different node because this other node has less usage than this one, it's going to do that. And that means your container is going to start up somewhere else, and you want it to start up fast. Ideally, you have multiple containers, and so it's not that big of a deal, but you're losing a certain percentage of resources. Same with if you're scaling up based on the resources that are coming in. You want to be able to react to that fast, especially if you're thinking about serverless. It becomes really important. So this, of course, graphs prove everything, right? So you can see here and I'm sorry if anybody's colorblind. So the line at the bottom in that square is red. That's your maximum requests per second that your application can handle at a given time. And in the blue, you can see the load. And the load, there's more requests coming in. And at some point, you see that the load is higher than what your application can handle. And so you're losing, customers, you're losing requests because your application can't scale fast enough with a traditional Java. So that's not really ideal. So if you look at, let's pretend this is a Kubernetes node, you can see, your platform resources, you have your kind of beefy Java applications, and you can see quickly that you run into resource starvation because your applications are too big to place on these nodes, and you can't use those nodes in an optimal way. And so what's happened at a lot of organizations is that they still have some of their traditional Java applications, but they'll start writing their new code in non-Java languages like a Go or a Node.js or whatever that have a much smaller footprint that start up faster. And that means that, for the Java developers, that's not so great because now they have to learn new languages, and there's a lot of features in Java that are really cool that you might not be able to use in those languages. And so that's, that's the idea behind Quarkus is, can we use our existing Java skills and expertise and take advantage of, this new kind of cloud-native Kubernetes world out there. And so Quarkus, our slogan is supersonic, subatomic Java. Supersonic because it starts up really fast. Subatomic, so imagine an atom, it's pretty small, and so subatomic is even smaller. So the idea behind that is that Quarkus is really small, has a very small footprint, and it's still Java, which that's really cool. So the way that Quarkus does its build compared to the classic way that Java application is built. So on the top, you can see that the way that I was showing before. Here at the bottom, you can see how Quarkus does it. So you have at your build time, so before you're actually finalizing the build of your application, the packaging of your application, Quarkus is going to do a bunch of that work that traditionally happens when you start up your application. So it's going to do a bunch of optimization to make your application start up much faster, package it smaller by doing that class path scanning and the file system lookup and everything, and building its model of the world before finally packaging the application. And that's how we can have a lot of gain in terms of speed and footprint. And then Quarkus also, who's heard of GraalVM? So GraalVM is a way to package a Java application to a native binary. So you don't need to run it on a JVM. You can just run as if you do it for Linux, for example, you can run it in a container. You can have a very small container because you don't even need a JVM in there. That's kind of a side story to all this. But with Quarkus, since it's built from kind of the ground up to do all this optimization, it also makes it really easy to start working with native binary. So if you want to do build your Java application into a native binary to have really fast startup, even smaller footprints, especially in containers, have much smaller containers. That's super easy to do with Quarkus, and I'll definitely show that in a little bit. So just to kind of show the difference between your traditional cloud native stack, think maybe like a Spring Boot application or something. You can see, in terms of memory usage and in terms of startup time, the difference is pretty dramatic, right? So in terms of memory usage, this is also kind of an older slide. I should probably update it because it actually got even better. But you can see in terms of startup time, 4.3 seconds versus sub-second. That's more appropriate for cloud-native applications that need to start up fast. Nobody's going to wait for a website that loads resources, that loads their stuff in 1, 2, 3, 4 seconds. That's not what we want, right? So Quarkus helps with that. So we can keep using our Java skills and take advantage of the best of the breed in terms of cloud native runtimes. So here you can see kind of how those Quarkus applications are sometimes even smaller than your Node.js's or whatever that are running on a Kubernetes node. Yeah, and in terms of startup time, you can see as well. So startup time doesn't necessarily just mean loading your application, starting it up. There's actually on the JVM a certain warm-up time where it's still optimizing the application as the application is already running. So that's also something to take into consideration and you can see that Quarkus handles that much better, much faster, because it already has done a lot of that optimization ahead of time. And there's also we want to save resources and make our carbon footprint smaller, and that's something that also helps with Quarkus because it's using less resources, it's costing less in the cloud, and it's using less electricity. And so we're saving also maybe a little bit our planet as well. So my colleague Holly Cummins has written some articles about that, and so if you're interested in that, it's pretty small here, but I'll share the slides, and then you can look at those links. So that's in terms of the optimization and running Java fast, small footprint. But my favorite part about Quarkus is actually the developer joy and the developer experience. Because Quarkus, well, first of all, it's based on standards, so it uses your Java standards, Java EE standards, microprofile. And so there's not anything kind of spectacularly new. It's not, kind of all these crazy annotations that you have to start using. It uses the basic Java standards. And in terms of productivity, my favorite part, maybe, I used to develop a little bit back in the day with PHP as well. And one of the things that I liked with that is that, you change your code and then you can test it immediately, right? You don't have to recompile or anything. And with Quarkus, you can actually do that. So you can start dev mode on your local machine. And as you're making code changes, those changes get immediately loaded into the application. So you just have to refresh your browser or rerun your application, and your changes are there. You don't need to constantly be recompiling your application. There's also integrations with, for example, test containers and resulting in dev services. So for example, if you're using an external dependency like a database or a Kafka or something, and you're working on your local machine, well, I don't know about you, but I don't like having to configure a database just like it's, how it's working on production, or Lord forbid, installing Kafka on my local machine. The cool thing with the dev services is that if you use, for example, Kafka with your Quarkus, you just tell Quarkus, hey, I want to use Kafka, so you add this thing called an extension. Quarkus will automatically start up a Kafka container on your local machine, wire it into your application, and you're off to the races, and you can get started with that. So I'll definitely show that in a little bit too. There's a cool dev UI. There's a Quarkus CLI. I'll show that all in a little bit because I think it's cooler to show than to talk about. And then what's cool about Quarkus too, if any of you does reactive programming, that's something that you can do with Quarkus. But the best part about it is that if you start your application, you do your normal coding, just with blocking statements. If you call a database or something, you wait for the response and whatever. And at some point you say, well, actually this reactive model is kind of cool, has these event handlers and everything to use my threads more optimally. That's perfectly fine with Quarkus because you can just add reactive capabilities to your existing application. So with some of the other stacks, what you have to do is you have to decide upfront, am I going to build a reactive application or a classic imperative application? So with Quarkus, you can kind of say, well, I'm more familiar with a lot of the imperative paradigms, but here's a piece where reactive makes a lot of sense, so we can use it. And, of course, best of all, it's still Java, right? Quarkus is absolutely Java, which means that you can use everything that you're used to. You can use, well, it's based on Vertex. You can use your REST Easy. You can use microprofile, all these extensions that exist in the Java world. And then, yeah, in terms of the native compilation, like I already said, so if you want to compile your binary or your Java application down to a binary, that's something that you can do with Quarkus. So Red Hat, for example, is on the GraalVM advisory board to optimize the native building of Java applications. And so what can you use Quarkus for? Well, kind of anything. So you can build Kubernetes operators with it. And we have a session this afternoon by my colleague who's going to talk about how to use Java to build Kubernetes operators. So if you're interested in that, or if you're wondering what is a Kubernetes operator, definitely go to that session. Of course, you can build regular Java applications. You can use REST applications, even monoliths. Event-driven applications. Quarkus has a lot of extensions to work with event-driven capabilities. If you want to write serverless, that's something that Quarkus does really well too. So as integrations to work with your Azure functions or your Lambdas or whatever, works really well with Knative, which is another serverless framework. But what's also cool with Quarkus is that you can create CLI programs pretty easily with it, and because of this fast startup, you can use it in favor of maybe where I in the past would have used Python, for example, because it's more suited for those types of applications. Actually, Quarkus is a really good example of where you can compile down to a binary and run your application as a Java application as a kind of a regular CLI script. And so, well, let's see some of this in action, right? So how do you get started with Quarkus? Because it's kind of in the title, right? So it would not be very fair to you if I didn't start with that. So one of the things that you can do is you can go to quarkus.io, and I realize it's very small up there, but the URL is pretty easy. And if you go to quarkus.io, and as you can see, a few days ago, Quarkus 3.0 has launched, so even more goodness in Quarkus. But if you want to just get started, well, first of all, you can read about, what is Quarkus and blah, 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 a little bit more in depth than I'm telling you. There's documentation, there's getting started tutorials. You can read about the extensions, and I'll show that in just a little bit what exactly that means. And the Quarkus community is really responsive too. So if you run into any questions or anything, there's a lot of people that are happy to help you out. So if you want to get started, you just hit that code button there, start coding, and then you go to code.quarkus.io. And if our internet wants to collaborate, then in a second we'll see, kind of who's familiar with the Spring starter. That's pretty much the same thing. Let's see if it wants to reload. If not, we'll move on to a different way of starting up Quarkus. Anyway, so this page shows you, a way to get started with Quarkus pretty easily, and then you can select what kind of extensions you want to use with Quarkus. And extensions basically means like add extra capabilities to your Quarkus application. So if you want to use Postgres database, well, there's an extension for that. You want to use Hibernate, there's an extension for that. So you can extend your core Quarkus application with the features that you want. So that's what's behind this, but there's other ways of doing this too. So another way to get started with a Quarkus application is there's a Quarkus CLI. So there's Quarkus, and so basically you have a bunch of things that you can do with the CLI, and including creating a new project. So we can just say, let's go to my, I created a folder, JDI23. I'll remove this previously created. So if I do let me clear it, Quarkus create app, that's all I have to do to get started with the CLI. I could provide, more parameters to say, what kind of, what the name of my project wants to be and which version I want to use, and I can say which extensions I want to use and everything. But at the base, you can just do Quarkus create app, and it'll create an application for you. And again, it's going to the internet, which is not very happy right now. But so we'll move on to a third way of doing this. So if we start a new window here, so there's a Quarkus plugin for VS Code for IntelliJ as well that allows you to, for example, create a Quarkus project. So if we do that, and then I guess we have the same problem with the internet. Let's see how that goes. This is always fun, isn't it? So what we'll do then is we'll, command completed. Let's go back to that. Okay, so here we have a Quarkus application that was created. And so by default, if I don't specify anything specific, what it's going to do is it's going to, well, create an application, a Java application with Maven. If I supplied Gradle as a parameter, it would have done the same thing with Gradle. Sets up config properties, Docker files, and a REST easy reactive code start just to get us started. So if I go to this application, let's use VS Code in this case, make it a little bigger. So it created my code with Quarkus, and actually, let's do it. So code with Quarkus. There we go. And so this is a Quarkus application, and as you can see, there's nothing magic about it. If you're familiar with Maven, you'll see that, yeah, it's very standard. You get, by default, your Quarkus BOM included with it, which makes it very convenient because all the dependencies that you're going to add, all the extensions that you're going to use with Quarkus, you don't have to specify specific versions. They'll just be tied to that same Quarkus version. If you want to use a specific version, of course, you can. But it makes it easy to, when you upgrade to a new version, to have the same version. So in this case, you know, just a very basic Quarkus application that has REST easy reactive, already has even a unit test in there. So if we go to our source test, we can see that there's a unit test, and we have our main Java, and it created a greeting resource that says, hello from REST easy reactive. So, you know, pretty simple application that just exposes an endpoint at /hello, and we can try it, right? So if we go to, well, I'll run it in my terminal here. So if I do Quarkus dev, or you can do Maven Quarkus dev, same difference. You start this dev mode that I was talking about where it automatically reloads everything. So if we do that, our application is going to start up on our local machine, and I can go to my browser, and if I go to localhost 8080, well, congratulations, I created a Quarkus application, and it has that hello endpoint that it gave it to us for free, right? Which said hello from REST easy reactive. So if I want to change, I want to start developing my code, and I want to say hello from Istanbul, and I go back to the browser, I hit refresh, and it's already there, right? So for Java, that's kind of cool that it's able to do that. Now, it does the same thing for testing. So here in the bottom, you can see press R to resume testing. So if we do that, we're going to do the same thing, the live reloads for testing. And we can see, oh, we have a test failure because, you know, I changed my code. I said hello from Istanbul, and instead the test says hello from REST easy reactive. So we need to fix our test. And if we do that, I didn't do anything else, and it just reruns that particular test because it noticed, hey, there's a change in this particular file, so I'm going to run this particular test. So you get real quick feedback loops as you're developing, which I think is really cool. compared to having to manually run your tests, and then maybe you'll forget, and then as you're packaging your application later, then you see all these test failures because you forgot to run those tests. So that's pretty handy. So another cool thing about Quarkus is when you're in this dev mode is that there's a dev UI. So if you go to /q/dev, you go to this dev UI, and I'm going to make it a little smaller so it's a little more visible, which has a ton of cool features in it. So first of all, it shows the extensions that you've added to your application. And then you can see, for example, hey, we added REST Easy Reactive to our application. And then you can see, for example, for this extension, what your endpoint scores are or whatever in terms of whether it's reactive or not. You can also change your configuration here in this dev UI, which for me personally, I really like this because I can't always remember all the configuration properties that you can set. So, if I want to change maybe the port, I can just search for, port, and then somewhere in there, we'll see, like the port that we're exposing. Or, maybe I want to change another value. So for example, if I want to add a configuration property to my file, string, let's say greeting, and I need to, of course, give it a name. So if I add a property, you'll see my test is failing because I'm wanting to use a property, but I don't have it defined. So if I go back to my application, and maybe I forgot to define this this property, and I'm testing. Actually, I need to break it better. So hello. Oh, I'm in my test. That's why. Let's change this. Add it to our greeting resource. And my copy paste didn't work. I have to type config property name greeting string. Okay. And so we want to, instead of hard coding our string, we want to use a property. So of course, oops, now we're going to see that our application definitely fails now. But there's another cool thing about Quarkus is it does a bunch of things to try to make your developer experience better, and including this one. So it says, hey, you don't have a, you want to use a configuration property, but you don't have it defined. Do you want to define it? Sure. Hello from Istanbul. Update. And now, well, of course it works in our browser, but if I go back to my application properties, it actually added it. So the dev UI helps you, with those properties as well. So now I was telling you about these dev services. So maybe I want to use a database. So what you can do in Quarkus is you can add extensions, right? So the extensions to expand your project. So you can do this from your IDE. I don't know where it went. Add extensions. Oh, that's cool. So we'll do it in a different way. So we can use the Quarkus CLI as well. So Quarkus extension add PostgreSQL. Let's see what it does. Because that's another cool thing about the Quarkus CLI is that when you try to add an extension and you don't have the exact name of the extension right, Quarkus will try to infer what you meant. So because usually it should have been quarkus.io : or Quarkus JDBC PostgreSQL or something. So we'll see if it's able to configure or able to find it. But again, our internet's not being very nice. We can see here unable to reach our extensions. So let's give it a moment and then see if it'll load it or not. If not, we can move on to the next thing. And actually, let's do that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a different project that already has this, because this one's, that's the other one where we wanted to create a new application. We'll hide that. All right, so here we have an application that's already kind of built. It has basically a bunch of things to allow you to make a vote for which IDE you like. And so basically, you have a bunch of different components. So you have a UI, you have a camel route, so using Apache Camel to accept what your choices that you made in the UI and send them into a Kafka stream and then save them to a database. And so this is quite a little bit more of a complex application. And so there's basically 3 different small Quarkus applications here. So there's a UI, there's a processor, and there's an ingester. And there was also a Twitter component, but with the Twitter API changes, that doesn't work anymore, but that's okay. So if I want to start this up, I can go to my terminal, and I can run this in the dev mode. So I'm going to stop the other one so we don't have any conflicts. And then we'll start this up. And I have... So I could I can go into each folder and start the dev mode, or I have this little script here that starts them up all 3. So let's see if that works. Crossing our fingers. So we're starting dev mode for 3 different projects, and that basically starts up the entire architecture that I was showing you. So not only does it start these applications, it also starts all the dependencies, so the Kafka that was behind it and the database that's behind it. So if we go to Podman Desktop here, for example, so Podman Desktop's kind of similar to Docker Desktop. So it shows the running containers in this instance. So you can see a Postgres database was started up, and a Red Panda Kafka container started up, and then test containers started up because it's using test containers in the background. So you can see here, Kafka dev services are starting, blah, 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 and then Postgres is starting, it loads some stuff in the database. And then if we go to our local host, 8080, we're not going to see hello from Istanbul anymore. We're seeing, this simple voter application, and yeah, this is the best I can do with UI, sorry. But so you can vote, like, hey, I want to vote for VS Code or IntelliJ or OpenShift DevSpace or Vim or whatever. Very simple application, but behind it are those 3 services, right? And so since we're running it in dev mode, each one of those has, the dev UI that's related to that. So in the UI part, for example, we have extensions like Quarkus Qt, which is a templating engine. And we have, for example, also, because I have Kubernetes extensions, I can deploy directly to Kubernetes, or, in this case, I have an OpenShift extension, and I can deploy my application straight to OpenShift. And I can add extensions, for example, for health endpoint. So if you're starting your application on Kubernetes, you want to make sure you have liveness and readiness probes. So that basically report saying the application is not just started up, but it's ready to take requests. So that's how you tell Kubernetes how to do that. So in Quarkus, basically all you have to do is say Quarkus extension. This one is still going. I'm going to stop it. Quarkus extension add microprofile health, and it would do that. But with our internet, that's not working so well. Let's not do that. But so to show you the other components, because we have the UI running on port 8080, and we have some of the backend stuff running on port 8081, for example. And you can see here, Quarkus generates Kubernetes manifests automatically because I added a Kubernetes extension. And And I think it needs to go to the internet to do that because it might not have that dependency on my local machine. But you can see there's also a Kafka client. And I'm going to go to our previous dev UI because in the very latest version of Quarkus, I could not find the Kafka UI. But here in the dev mode, you have an actual view of the Kafka that is running on my local machine, and I can see which messages have been sent. So we can see that, you know, those votes that I made earlier, they're all here. And this is all running on my local machine, right? So I didn't configure any Kafka, I didn't do anything. It just did that automatically. So if we added, well, we can do two things. We can add another vote and insert it straight into Kafka. And I have to remember what it's named. Let's give another vote for Eclipse here. So we can do it straight from this UI. And you can interact directly with Kafka. And so if we send that, we should see, if I did it right, that I added another vote to for Eclipse. Yep, so you can see another vote for Eclipse because I inserted a message into the Kafka UI right here. And so you can do it like this, or you can you know, keep an eye on what new messages and do a bunch of debugging. So I think we are wrapping up here with a few with a few minutes to go. So just a couple of highlights here. So Quarkus 3 was released just a few days ago, which has, for example, updates in terms of moving to Jakarta EE10. So instead of Java X namespace, moves to Jakarta namespace. It's updated to Hibernate 6. We got even more productivity components. So there's Azure Functions extension. There's contract testing support. Microprofile 6, and you know that Quarkus CLI even has some more capabilities. So you can do Quarkus. Oh, maybe that's something that I can maybe show without there being internet. So if I wanted to go and to my very simple application here, and I wanted to create a new, I wanted to create a container image with this. I can just do Quarkus image build, for example, and without adding anything extra, Quarkus will package my application, and you can see because I had the base image already cached on my local machine, it was able to build the container image without needing to go to the internet. So the way that it does that is that Quarkus, when you create a new Quarkus application, it already comes with a couple Docker files. So you don't have to be an expert in Docker or in container building. Quarkus is nice enough to supply you with the base image to create containers really easily. And then you can even say Quarkus image push and push it to a registry, or you can deploy it to Kubernetes very easily. And you can use, if you like to use Jib, for example, you can do Quarkus image build Jib, or you can use build packs or whatever, or you can do a native, build a native binary, and all you have to do is just do -- native, and it's going to compile your Java code down to a binary, put that in a even smaller container, because you can see there's multiple Docker files, right? So the native one actually is a very small container image where you just copy in the binary. So if we did that, it's going to take a little bit longer because it needs to do a native build of your application. And you can see here, well, it's trying to use a builder image that I don't have cached on my local machine, unfortunately. So we'll see how that goes. But basically, because I don't have GraalVM installed on my local machine, Quarkus is first going to look, you know, hey, do you have GraalVM installed? If not, okay, let's just use a container to do it. And it's going to pull down a container image to do the build inside another container. But we're not going to be able to see that without our internet again. So those are some cool things that you can do with Quarkus. There's a lot more. This is really a cool project. Well, even my slides won't work anymore now. It's a really cool project that gives you a ton of developer productivity features that make, in my opinion, developing with Java a lot of fun. And I might even say it's for those who are starting with development, that maybe typically these days universities will start, kind of with Python or something because it's a lot simpler to start with. I think Quarkus can really do that for new development, and Java has so much more in its ecosystem that I think it makes a lot of sense. This is the source code for that voter app. If you want to really look how it's built and how it all works, I'll put that in the slides as well. And yeah, if I can't go into the slideshow mode, so the slides are a little bit smaller. My colleague Eric also has a cool application that's a Quarkus Superheroes, this little game that he built to showcase all the different components and pieces that you can build with a Quarkus application. So that's something too. And then sometimes we still get, even though Quarkus at this point is definitely mature, it's been around for a while, we still get some hesitation from some organizations that say, yeah, it's not mature enough yet. But there's actually quite a few large organizations, even banks, governments that are using Quarkus in production. So this is not just something new, something experimental. It's something that you can use today and really boost your productivity with. Yeah, I wanted to show you how I was going to deploy the application on an OpenShift sandbox. So OpenShift is a kind of a flavor of Kubernetes. And this sandbox is something that you can get for free to start with, and it makes it really easy to work with containers in Kubernetes. So we'll have to show that next time. And then my colleague Natalie and Marcus wrote a book that you can download for free about modernizing enterprise Java, and is actually a book about moving from a legacy application to cloud-native applications such as Quarkus. So you can get that book for free on that URL. And then one more book for those who are Spring developers. This is also another book that you can download for free by the same person who did the Quarkus game, Eric. And Daniel, who is here in the room, is also one of the co-writers. Mr. Blonde guy there. So this book is for the Spring developers to move, how to move to Quarkus. So there's Spring extensions in Quarkus to make it fairly easy. So if you're used to, or if you have an application that has, the specific Spring annotations, you can use those extensions to migrate while, still having all those annotations in there. So keep an eye out for that book. And then last but not least, if you go to, well, first of all, if you like this session, you can go to Twitter and say, hey, Kevin Dubois, awesome, awesome session, but I will also post the slides there so you can get access to all those resources so you don't have to keep taking pictures. And that is it, so thank you. And we have